Imagine a nation bigger than England, blessed with soil fertile enough to feed an entire continent, a long, pristine Atlantic shoreline, a stable democracy, very little crime, and some of the best living standards in the hemisphere. Now imagine that same nation almost entirely empty of people. No major inland cities, no scattered farming towns, only endless grassland and 12 million cattle, outnumbering humans 3-1. This puzzling contradiction is real. It carries a name, and unpacking it reveals something more fascinating than simply vacant land. It explains why a quiet but growing wave of American retirees has begun moving there deliberately, treating the emptiness itself as the appeal. This is the story of Uruguay, and by the end you will understand exactly why so few people live there, and why that emptiness might be the strongest reason to move there yourself. Look first at the map, squeezed between South America's two giants, Brazil to the north and Argentina to the west. Uruguay initially seems like a forgotten sliver, a leftover that belonged to no one else. That first impression is misleading. Uruguay is larger than England, larger than Greece, larger than Cuba, larger than the entire state of Oklahoma. It holds some of the richest soil on the planet, a mild climate free of extremes, a long Atlantic coast, and natural grasslands rolling endlessly toward the horizon. By any geographic measure, this should be a crowded country. Yet, when you map where people actually live, something odd shows up. Uruguay has only 3.5 million residents total. Madrid alone houses more people than this entire nation. Nearly half of those residents are packed into one single spot on the southern coast. One city, one dot on the map. Montevideo. Everything else, the vast, fertile, beautiful remainder of the country, sits almost completely empty. So how does a nation with extraordinary land, political stability, and one of the finest standards of living in Latin America end up nearly uninhabited beyond its capital? And why are thousands of Americans now quietly settling into the very towns everyone else ignores? To understand that, we need to go back to the water. During the colonial period, the coastline along the Rio de la Plata was among the most contested stretches of land on the continent. Spain and Portugal fought over it for decades, for one simple reason. This exact location held one of South America's finest natural harbors. When Uruguay finally won independence in 1828, every piece of infrastructure built afterward radiated outward from that single harbor. Study the old railway network, and the pattern is obvious. Every line starts somewhere inland and ends in the same place, Montevideo. The highways follow the identical pattern. Every road eventually leads back to the capital. When waves of European immigrants arrived in the late 1800s, Italians, Spaniards, Germans, they did not spread across the countryside. They simply stayed near where the ships had docked. Montevideo offered the jobs, the factories, the university, the banks. The interior offered only grass. The capital became a magnet so powerful, it has never stopped drawing people toward it. Now set Montevideo aside and examine that interior more closely, because the emptiness has nothing to do with mountains, jungle, or desert. There is no geographic barrier at all. The land is gently rolling, nearly flat, perfectly suited for settlement. So why did towns never take root there? The answer is cattle. From the earliest days of colonization, Uruguay's interior became one immense grazing operation. Those natural grasslands were ideal for raising cattle at enormous scale, but cattle ranching demands huge tracts of land and almost no people to operate it. Giant estancias, ranches spanning thousands of acres, fell under the control of a handful of wealthy families. A single rancher could oversee tens of thousands of acres with only a few hired hands. There was never a need for farming villages or market towns to spring up. The interior turned into what geographers call a green desert, productive, profitable, and almost completely empty of people. The numbers today confirm the story. Uruguay holds roughly 12 million cattle against 3.5 million people, cows outnumbering humans by more than 3-1. Cattle and geography only explain half the story. Uruguay went through its demographic transition nearly a century before its neighbors. While Brazil and Argentina experienced population booms through most of the 20th century. Uruguay moved in the opposite direction. By the early 1900s, it had already separated church and state more thoroughly than almost anywhere on earth. It legalized divorce in 1907, built a free secular school system, and established one of the most progressive social frameworks in the hemisphere. The result was a sharp decline in birth rates, not in the 1970s like the rest of Latin America, but back in the 1910s and 1920s. Today, Uruguay carries one of the lowest birth rates anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, and its population pyramid resembles Germany or Japan more than a developing nation, weighted heavily toward older generations with a shrinking base of young people beneath them. Then there is a third force at work: emigration. Every time Uruguay faced an economic crisis, the same pattern repeated. Young, educated Uruguayans packed up and left for Buenos Aires, for Sao Paulo, for Madrid, for Miami. An estimated 600,000 Uruguayans now live abroad. In a country of only 3.5 million people, that amounts to nearly 20% of the entire population living outside its own borders. Uruguay has quietly been losing people for more than a century, and the empty map of its interior reflects every single departure. And yet here, the story takes an unexpected turn. Despite the empty interior, the aging population, and the steady emigration, Uruguay has quietly built something remarkable. Check almost any quality of life ranking for Latin America, and Uruguay sits at or near the top. For press freedom, for democracy, for low corruption, for income equality, for healthcare access. Its poverty rate is the lowest in Latin America. Its middle class is the most stable in the region. Its violent crime rate ranks among the lowest anywhere in the hemisphere. Somehow, with almost nobody living there, Uruguay built a genuinely prosperous, stable, democratic society, arguably the best country in Latin America to actually live in, and almost nobody outside the region has noticed. That is exactly why Americans have started paying attention. Over the past decade, a small but steadily growing wave of American retirees has discovered what Uruguay's empty map actually means for them. Not a warning sign, but an opportunity. Consider Montevideo's Positos neighborhood, sitting directly on the waterfront of the Rio de la Plata. Tree-lined streets, beautiful beaches, excellent restaurants, modern apartments with river views, and rent for a comfortable one-bedroom, running between $700 and $1,100 a month. A full meal at a local restaurant, including Uruguay's famous grilled meats and a glass of wine, costs roughly $8 to $14 per person. Private health insurance for a retiree runs $80 to $150 monthly. Add it together, and a comfortable monthly budget in Montevideo looks like this. Rent around $800 to $1,100, food around $300 to $400, healthcare around $100 to $150, transportation and entertainment around $150 to $200, totaling roughly $1,350 to $1,850. The average American Social Security check for a couple runs about $2,800 to $3,200 monthly, comfortably covering everything with savings left over. Montevideo, though, is far from the only option. Look east toward the Atlantic, and you find Punta del Este, South America's most famous beach resort, steadily shifting from a seasonal getaway into a year-round international community. Just beyond it, smaller coastal towns like La Paloma, Piriápolis, and Punta del Diablo offer beachfront living at prices that feel almost impossible. Rent for a comfortable apartment near the sand, running $600 to $900 monthly, with fresh seafood costing only $8 to $12 per person. Then there is Colonia del Sacramento, a UNESCO World Heritage colonial town on the Rio de la Plata. Just an hour by ferry from Buenos Aires. Cobblestone streets, old Portuguese colonial architecture, waterfront cafes, and a pace of life that feels like stepping backward in time. Rent here also runs $600 to $900 monthly, and for retirees drawn to European charm, at low cost. Colonia is extraordinary. Now consider the practical side, because Uruguay offers something most retirement destinations simply do not: a tax system genuinely built to attract foreign retirees. Uruguay operates on a territorial tax system, meaning foreign income, including a U.S. pension, Social Security check, or investment income, goes untaxed in Uruguay during the first several years of residency. Your Social Security arrives in full, your pension arrives in full, your investment income arrives in full, untouched. Getting residency is fairly simple too. You apply through the Uruguayan Immigration Office with proof of income, a clean criminal record, and basic paperwork. And the process typically takes 3 to 6 months. The income requirements are reasonable enough that most American retirees easily qualify through Social Security alone. After 3 years of residency, you can apply for permanent residency, and after 5 years, you can apply for Uruguayan citizenship, which comes with a passport opening doors across South America and Europe. The banking system is among the most stable in Latin America, having weathered crises that devastated neighboring Argentina and Brazil, and U.S. dollars are widely accepted nationwide, with easy conversion to pesos at any bank or exchange house. Healthcare deserves special attention, since it is usually the concern that stops American retirees from making the leap. Uruguay runs a dual healthcare system, public and private. Legal residents can access the public system, offering comprehensive coverage at very low cost. While most expats choose the private system instead, known locally as mutualistas, which delivers excellent care at a fraction of U.S. prices. Private insurance through that system costs $80 to $150 monthly for a retiree. A private doctor visit costs $20 to $40, and dental work runs 60 to 70% cheaper than in the United States. Hospitals, especially in Montevideo, are modern, well-equipped, and staffed by physicians trained to international standards, with many doctors speaking English, particularly in private facilities serving the international community. Community matters just as much as cost, because retiring abroad without any support network is one of the biggest mistakes people make. Uruguay's expat community remains small, but is growing quickly. In Montevideo's Positos and Carrasco neighborhoods, established communities of American, European, and other international retirees have already navigated the residency process, found trusted doctors, and built genuine social circles. English is spoken in international schools, in expat-oriented businesses, and increasingly throughout the growing foreign community, though learning even basic Spanish enriches the experience significantly. And then there is the lifestyle itself, a pace most Americans have practically forgotten exists. Long lunches stretching into the afternoon, evening walks along the waterfront, weekend asados that pull neighbors together for hours of grilled meat and conversation. The idea of rushing barely exists here. Uruguayans tend to be warm, well-educated, and genuinely welcoming to foreigners, without the transactional edge that can make expat life feel hollow elsewhere. The food culture alone is worth the move, with some of the finest beef in the world, and a full parrilla dinner, with wine running just $12 to $18 per person at a local restaurant, while fresh produce, artisan cheeses, and local wines fill neighborhood markets at prices that make American grocery bills look absurd. What makes this moment interesting is that Uruguay itself is changing. For the first time in decades, economic activity is spreading beyond Montevideo. The forestry industry has reshaped entire departments in the interior. The eastern coast is developing into a year-round international community, and foreign investment, particularly from Argentina, Brazil, and increasingly the United States, is flowing into real estate, agriculture, and technology. Property prices remain dramatically lower than comparable destinations, with a comfortable apartment in Montevideo's best neighborhoods running $120,000 to $250,000, a beachfront property in smaller coastal towns running $80,000 to $150,000, and a colonial home in Colonia del Sacramento running $100,000 to $200,000. For American retirees who already own property at home, selling it and buying in Uruguay can wipe out housing costs entirely. Uruguay remains one of geography's great paradoxes, a territory larger than England, soil that could feed a continent, an Atlantic coastline stretching hundreds of miles, and only 3.5 million people, half of them packed into a single city, leaving the rest of this extraordinary country to the cattle, the grasslands, and the silence. That map was never drawn by nature. It was drawn by a colonial harbor, by the economics of cattle ranching, by a society that modernized faster than anyone expected, and by generations of young people who left in search of something bigger elsewhere. But for American retirees searching for something different, something stable, something safe, something genuinely beautiful, Uruguay's empty map is not a warning sign at all. It is an invitation to a country where a social security check covers everything, where the beef is extraordinary and the wine costs almost nothing, where the streets are safe and the people are warm, where the pace of life still feels like retirement is supposed to feel. Uruguay chose depth over breadth, quality over quantity, and in doing so created something genuinely rare in the modern world. A country that is almost empty and almost perfect. Before wrapping up, here are 10 facts worth knowing if Uruguay is seriously on your radar. First, Uruguay is consistently ranked the most socially progressive country in Latin America, the first nation in the Americas to legalize same-sex marriage nationally back in 2013, and it has maintained strict separation of church and state since 1917, over a century ago. Second, U.S. Social Security benefits are paid in full, even while living in Uruguay, since the country is not on the Social Security Administration's restricted list, meaning the check arrives every month in full, deposited directly into a U.S. bank account, accessible through international ATMs. Third, Uruguay has the fastest internet in Latin America, with download speeds consistently ranking first or second in the entire region, ahead of Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Mexico, which matters enormously for retirees relying on video calls or remote financial management. Fourth, Uruguay's crime rate is the lowest in mainland South America, with Montevideo consistently ranking among the safest capital cities in the Western Hemisphere. And many retirees describe walking home alone at midnight, they're feeling safer than in their own American neighborhoods. Fifth, Uruguay has no inheritance tax and no wealth tax on foreign assets, meaning anything held outside the country goes untouched, which combined with the territorial tax system makes it one of the most favorable tax environments for American retirees anywhere in the world. Sixth, the Uruguayan peso has remained one of the most stable currencies in Latin America for decades, with controlled inflation sustained for more than 20 years, even as neighboring Argentina endured repeated currency crises. Seventh, Uruguay has the highest literacy rate in Latin America at 98.7%, producing a highly educated population with a cultural life, theater, literature, music, art that rivals cities twice the size of Montevideo. Eighth, permanent residency can be obtained in as little as 3 years, and citizenship in 5, with Uruguayan citizenship granting visa-free access to over 140 countries, including the entire European Union, making it one of the most straightforward paths to a second passport anywhere. Ninth, Uruguay produces more electricity from renewable sources than almost any country on Earth, with over 95% coming from wind, solar, and hydroelectric power, meaning rare outages, a reliable grid, and clean air across well-preserved landscapes. And 10th, Uruguay has more coastline per capita than nearly any country on the planet, with only 3.5 million people spread across hundreds of miles of Atlantic beaches, meaning more beach per person than in virtually any other coastal nation on Earth, uncrowded shores, quiet coastal towns, and beachfront property at a fraction of comparable destinations. Uruguay is not the loudest retirement destination out there. It does not have Costa Rica's marketing budget or Portugal's name recognition. But for retirees willing to look past the obvious choices and dig into the actual data, Uruguay keeps showing up at the top of every list that genuinely matters. Safest, most stable, best quality of life, lowest poverty, most progressive. A country that is almost empty and almost perfect. So the real question is this: would you consider retiring in Uruguay? And if so, which calls to you more? The culture and convenience of Montevideo, the beach lifestyle of Punta del Este, or the colonial charm of Colonia del Sacramento? Leave your answer in the comments below.